2025年9月的最后一天，荷兰点燃了一场名为安世之乱的火。起初只是半导体界的一丝火花，如今演变成重创欧洲车市的野火，甚至蔓延至全球汽车制造链。这场看似技术纠纷的事件，背后却是国家安全与产业主权的角力。事件的核心角色之一，中国车企在母国全力声援下，这场风暴以国家对公司、盟友对市场的多层战争在世界屏幕展开。到底这场半导体的安世之乱是如何发生的？时间回到2025年的初秋，欧洲车厂突然陷入晶片断链的恐慌，多家车用晶片供应商相继传出停货、交付延迟的消息，部分车型还被迫暂停出货。起初，人们以为只是单纯的物流瓶颈，直到矛头指向一家公司——安世半导体。安世半导体原为荷兰电子公司飞利浦旗下的分拆公司，在2018年被中国文泰科技收购，成为旗下100%的控股子公司。当年，它的产品被归为成熟制程、非战略领域，因而顺利通过欧盟及荷兰的审查，摇身成为中资企业。多年来，安世默默供应全球车用功率元件、二极体与电源管理晶片，是汽车产业最不起眼却也最不可或缺的一环。
Globally, there were around 15 million new vehicles that were supposed to have been produced that were not because the semiconductors weren't available. And in many cases, manufacturers produced vehicles without all the semiconductors they needed, with the promise that when they became available, they would then install them and they would have functionalities in their vehicles that they didn't have because those chips were missing.
A really common thing that we saw were heated seats not actually being in the vehicle that was being produced and sold to customers, with the promise that we'll come back and we'll add heated seats because, to your point, the semiconductors weren't available to produce the vehicle at that time. That was 2020 to 2023. Yes. It's been 2 years post-chip shortage. Manufacturers have been able to produce vehicles everywhere. Everything's been hunky-dory, all good. Now we are at another moment in time where we have a chip shortage. And again, the headline this morning comes by way of Nissan and Mercedes-Benz. Executives at both companies essentially coming out and saying, guys, this could be catastrophic for our businesses. There was also the head of Bosch coming out and making comments about how impactful this current issue with Nexperia will be. So let's talk a little bit here, Dad. What is going on this time around? And this, to be clear, it has to do with one company, not 10, not 100, one company, Nexperia. What's going on here and why has it potentially gotten worse?
Now, the Dutch government has seized control of Nexperia, a Chinese-owned semiconductor chip manufacturer based in the Netherlands.
The Dutch government invoked never-before-used powers under a Dutch law known as the Availability of Goods Act to take over the company. Now, it is an unprecedented act, a move that the Dutch government itself has described as highly exceptional and justified only because it was crucial to maintaining the continuity of technological knowledge on Dutch and European soil.
The move underscores a broader European shift toward using national security tools to control ownership and decision-making in sensitive tech supply chains. The action is also the latest flashpoint in Western efforts to shield semiconductor ecosystems amid intensifying US-EU export controls and investment screening targeting China.
On October 12th, the Netherlands announced it had intervened in Nexperia, a major computer chip maker based in Nijmegen that supplies components for cars and consumer electronics. The government cited concerns over the possible transfer of sensitive technology to Nexperia's Chinese parent company, WION. This marks the first time ever that Amsterdam has used powers under a rarely invoked law known as the Availability of Goods Act. The move caused WION's shares to fall by 10% in Shanghai on October 13th. Now, the Dutch government hasn't taken ownership of Nexperia, but it will have the authority to reverse or block key management decisions that could harm national or European interests. Regular chip production at Nexperia continues for now. In response, WION has hit back hard, calling the Dutch action excessive interference driven by geopolitical bias. The company accused some non-Chinese Nexperia executives of attempting a cloaked power grab to change the firm's equity structure through legal means. WION says it's consulting lawyers and seeking government support to protect its legitimate rights and interests. Nexperia was once part of Dutch electronics giant Philips before being bought by WION in 2018 for $3.63 billion. It produces basic chips like diodes and transistors, as well as more advanced wide-gap semiconductors, which are critical for electric vehicles, chargers, and AI data centers. Meanwhile, WION confirmed that its chairman, Zhang Xuezhing, was suspended from Nexperia's board by an Amsterdam court order on October 6th. An independent non-Chinese board member will now be appointed with a deciding vote, temporarily limiting WION's control. The Dutch move comes amid growing Western scrutiny of Chinese tech investments. In Britain, WION was ordered to divest ownership of a chip facility in Newport. And in 2023, the Netherlands reviewed Nexperia's acquisition of startup Noe over similar national security concerns. Tensions have also flared with the United States. Just last month, Washington added WION subsidiaries to its national security blacklist, alleging that the company was aiding Beijing's efforts to acquire advanced semiconductor capabilities. WION, already on the U.S. entity list since December 2024, maintains that Nexperia operates independently and complies with all global regulations. And while this battle unfolds in Europe and China, India is watching closely. Capital Mind's CEO Deepak Shenoy says the Nexperia case is a wake-up call for India to build self-reliance in critical technologies. He said, "This is exactly the kind of action India should study carefully." The Dutch took over a company because they didn't like the nationality of the shareholders. In the long run, they won't even let India acquire better tech. We must learn to build our own, from jet engines to sewing machines to chips.
The Dutch government seized Nexperia on 30th of September by invoking never-before-used powers under a World War II-era law known as the Availability of Goods Act that allows The Hague to intervene in private companies to secure critical supplies. If a company is seen as crucial to national security or technology, The Hague says it acted after acute signals of governance failures inside Nexperia and claimed the move was needed to keep key technology in the Netherlands and Europe. In response, China warned that the Dutch action had seriously affected global industry and supply chains. China's Commerce Minister urged the Dutch to promptly and properly resolve the issue and to protect the rights of Chinese investors. The Dutch minister says his government wanted to keep talking and find a constructive solution. Both sides agreed to keep working together on trade. The dispute has already spilled over into the markets. China has put export controls on some components made by Nexperia's China unit, which could affect European car makers that rely on those chips. The Nexperia case is now a test for Europe's push for tech security and how far China will go to defend its companies abroad.
受到美中科技竞争升温的影响，安氏半导体很早就被锁定为关键目标。根据路透社报道，美国商务部工业与安全局在2025年9月29日公告新规，凡是被列入实体清单企业持股达50%以上的子公司，也将自动纳入同样的出口限制。这项规定一出，安氏半导体随即成为最新受制对象。安氏的晶片广泛应用于 BMW 大众汽车以及宾士这些欧洲车厂，同时也是国际汽车零组件大厂 Bosch、Continental 的一级供应商。根据业界统计，安氏在欧洲车用功率元件市场的市占率接近9%，部分品项还甚至高达15%。这些零组件也透过供应链流入美国车厂的模组系统中，也就是说，即便通用、福特或特斯拉并未直接下单给安氏，他们的2级、3级供应商仍可能使用安氏的晶片。在实体清单限制之下，这些美国车厂可能被迫重新设计或更换零件规格。以车用半导体为例，替代周期平均需12到18个月。一旦安氏无法供应，欧美车厂的生产节奏都将面临供应链真空期，影响范围可能波及超过上百万辆汽车的年产能。虽然荷兰政府理论上不必跟随美国行动，但根据台湾媒体引述路透社报道，荷兰在今年9月接获讯息，本泰科技创办人张学正计划削减欧洲业务，预计裁撤约40%欧洲员工，关闭位于德国慕尼黑的研发中心， 甚至有传闻要把德国汉堡生产线的部分设备运回中国。这一连串动作引发荷兰高层警觉，在防止欧洲战略资产流失与维护晶片供应自主权的大前提下，荷兰政府于9月30日正式宣布，以治理不善的理由接管安氏半导体，成为欧洲对抗科技外移风险的最新案例。
At the end of last month, the Dutch government used a Cold War-era act, as you said, to take control of Nexperia and oust its Chinese CEO. The reason being that they didn't want sensitive technology to leak to China. Then the Chinese hit back, effectively ending Nexperia exports from China. So now the Chinese Commerce Ministry says, Nexperia, you can't export any more chips out of China. And this is a big problem for Nexperia, which has 70% of its chips in China for final processing. So they do go out of Germany when where they're manufactured, back to China, and then now they can't get them out of China again.
Met het ingrijpen bij de Nijmeegse chipfabrikant Nexperia is Nederland opnieuw het middelpunt in de steeds genadelozer handelsoorlog tussen Amerika en China. De Nederlandse staat gebruikte vorige maand een nog nooit eerder ingeroepen wet uit 1952 om het bedrijf los te weken van haar Chinese eigenaar. Dit tot grote woede van China. Ja, de man verantwoordelijk voor deze nogal onorthodoxe stap zit hier aan tafel. De missionair minister van Economische Zaken, Vincent Karremans. Meneer Karremans, welkom.
Dank u wel.
Ja, een wet uit 1952 die nog nooit is gebruikt. Heeft u gebruikt? Waarom?
Nou, omdat Nexperia een heel belangrijk bedrijf is in de wereldwijde chipproductie. De chips van Nexperia zitten werkelijk overal in. Van de tv's waar mensen mee nu naar dit programma kijken, tot auto's die gemaakt worden in Duitsland, Frankrijk, China en Amerika. En het is het enige bedrijf van deze omvang die dit soort chips maakt dat nog in Nederland en Europa gevestigd is. Ja. Voor de rest zijn alle bedrijven die dit soort chips maken in het buitenland, buiten Europa gevestigd. En de betreffende CEO, die dus ook veel in het nieuws is geweest de afgelopen tijd, die was heimelijk achter ons rug om bezig om de boel te verplaatsen, de onderneming leeg te halen, naar het buitenland te verplaatsen. En als hem dat was gelukt, dan was de laatste kennis, kunde en capaciteit die we in Europa nog hadden op het gebied van deze chips, die we dus voor alles gebruiken, was weggegaan. En dat had ons heel kwetsbaar gemaakt. En daarom heb ik ingegrepen. Ja, dus...
En wat was dan het moment dat u dacht, nu moet ik ingrijpen?
Toen ik de signalen kreeg, dus letterlijk concrete signalen, dat meneer Wing de onderneming aan het leegtrekken was, daarmee de laatste Europese kenniskunde en capaciteit die we hebben op dit gebied van deze chips zou verdwijnen uit Europa en ons daarmee dus heel kwetsbaar zou maken. Toen heb ik ingegrepen. En vervolgens was het denk ik op een donderdag, ik dacht dat het op donderdag was, dat ik dat principebesluit heb genomen. Vervolgens kreeg ik op zaterdagavond een belletje van iemand uit mijn team dat de Amerikanen precies op dat moment Nexperia op die lijst hebben gezet. Dus wij vroegen ons ook af, nou, is dit toeval of waar komt dit opeens vandaan? En daarvoor hebben we natuurlijk navraag gedaan bij de Amerikanen. En de signalen die we daarop hebben gekregen is dat dat te maken had met de aanstaande shutdown. Omdat je in de shutdown als Amerikaanse overheid dit soort bedrijven niet op lijsten kan plaatsen. En dat ze bij wijze van spreken het zekere voor het onzekere hebben genomen. Zodat ook tijdens die shutdown, als dat zou ingaan, Nexperia dus op die lijst zou staan.
Dus u zegt, weer even voor mijn begrip, u stelt deze wet in werking die we nog nooit in werking hebben getrokken sinds 1952... op precies dezelfde dag dat de Amerikanen exportbeperkingen
dat hebben ze eerder laten weten, ja.
Maar dat hebben ze eerder laten weten. Maar goed, die werden in werking gesteld ook op 30 september. En dat is toeval.
Dat is absoluut toeval.
One of the things that's baffling is we are trying to discern or understand what was the Netherlands thinking when they were going through this decision. And we have a theory that it's probably going to have tentacles from the United States and maybe other Western powers in order for them to say, yes, we'll back you up for this decision. Having said that, of course, China took this very calm response. After about 2 days, they immediately said, we're going to sanction and stop any rare earth minerals to be able to flow to Nexperia. Now, the reason that the Netherlands is stating that they wanted to do this is because they said they needed to have a firm supply of chips secured for the Netherlands and the EU for national security concerns. And this excuse that we keep hearing more and more and more, we're starting to now see it in more grave areas. The part that I wanted to sort of cap off on this little update is the fact that we just found out the entire EU automotive industry is at risk because now manufacturing facilities are grinding to a halt. They do not have the critical rare earth minerals that are required to be able to proceed with manufacturing. And so now this move has not only hurt the Netherlands, it's hurt the entire EU.
Wait, so are you saying that China first, 2 days after this happened, and Nexperia was taken by the Netherlands, so 2 days later, they sanctioned and decided to stop giving rare earth minerals to Nexperia? Are you saying that now they've also decided to do the same to the EV market? Or the auto market generally?
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we're starting to see is there's indications that the automotive facilities, the manufacturing facilities that are all over Europe are starting to slow down production because of the fact that they don't have some raw materials.
We could potentially be looking at the worst supply chain disruptions that could involve literally shutting down the plants. I would assume that every company uses them in some way, shape, or form. And it's not that easy to just say, okay, we use them or we don't, because they often come from tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers in prepackaged assemblies. You really have to drill down and say, okay, which tier 1 suppliers are using these chips? And the tier 1 suppliers, such as Bosch, would have to say, okay, which of our suppliers are using these chips? So you can see where the problem is. And to make a long story short, the several automotive trade groups have warned that there's only a few weeks supply of these chips left. So if they can't get out of China, we could potentially be looking at the worst supply chain disruptions that could involve literally shutting down the plants. And, we all remember what happened in COVID, the last chip crisis, Ukraine war, things like that. So it is really quite a big deal at the moment.
A few weeks. That's all the buffer the European auto industry has before plants start shutting down. Here's why this is catastrophic. Nexperia chips aren't just in one component. They're embedded in tier 1 and tier 2 supplier assemblies. Companies like Bosch don't even know which of their suppliers use Nexperia chips. This isn't a simple substitution problem. It's a complete supply chain archaeology project while the clock is ticking. And the scale? Nexperia produces over 50 billion chips annually, with 70% of those chips processed in China. The Dutch seized the building, China controls the production, and now BMW, Volkswagen, Ford, and Honda are all warning of imminent disruptions.
这是一场极不寻常的事件。它不仅是一次企业被地缘政治波及的案例，更是一场牵动制度边界的考验。为维护国家利益，荷兰政府援引投资审查、公司法与国家安全法，甚至追溯至冷战时期的条文，强制介入一家外资企业的经营。这样的手段在欧洲经济史上实属罕见。尽管安氏半导体早已历经多次政治风暴，但这次的冲击更显得格外深刻。它揭示了美国供应链安全战略的外溢效应，也暴露出欧洲在全球科技链中的尴尬位置：一边依赖中国的制造能量，一边又受制于华盛顿的战略节奏。当荷兰经济部长在电视访谈中为守住欧洲技术主权辩护时，我们看到的不只是政治人物的决断，而是整个欧洲在去全球化潮流中艰难平衡的缩影。毕竟这一切的起点并非中国的并购，而是欧洲产业结构常年累积的结果。过去飞利浦旗下的恩智浦因分拆而获得新生，但系出同门的安氏却在分拆后沦为全球战略竞逐中的一枚棋子。在这场博弈里，市场早已退场。正如欧洲汽车协会估计，若安氏晶片出货中断数周，欧洲汽车制造业恐将损失超过数十亿欧元的产值。这不只是商业风险，更是制度失灵的代价。从飞利浦到安氏，从市场机制到国家干预，欧洲正重新定义产业主权的边界。当政府必须以非常手段挽救产业命脉时，问题就变成：这真的是一次挽救，还是对制度信任的补课？安氏的故事提醒我们，在权力与技术相互交织的年代，企业不再只是市场主体，同时是国家战略与国际秩序的承载体。当市场自由与国家安全正面冲突，企业成为首当其冲的牺牲品。可以预见，所有权、信任与制度将是下一轮全球竞争中最昂贵也最关键的筹码。
This just shows how small the world really is and how interdependent we are, whether you be here in the United States or you're in Europe or you're in Asia. It's all interconnected, and world trade is behind all this, so that when countries have a dispute like this, how do you bring them to the table so that they can resolve this, so that it doesn't have major impacts across the industrial world? I don't know how you do it. I mean, the head of Mercedes-Benz said this is different than everything else. This is truly a political issue. It is not a manufacturing issue.
Yeah.
It is not anything other than two countries fighting over these chips and who should control it and whose intellectual property is it. And so if you would have said to me 50 years ago, there's going to be a point in your life, right, where you're going to be talking about semiconductors because the Dutch and the Chinese just can't get along, I would have looked at you and I would have said, you're out of your damn mind. What do I know about semiconductors? But why is it at 74 I have to learn all about semiconductors? It is the most basic, ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Hey, one other part of this story.
Yes.
You can't just swap out one semiconductor for another semiconductor. And the thing that I'm hitting on here is this idea of validation. You actually have to validate that the alternative sources that you're using to bring parts into a vehicle do exactly what you need them to do. So that's a huge component to this. Not to use the word component too many times, but that's a huge component to this, is that those individual components need to be validated. Not to mention the fact that you take 40% of the supply out of the market. It's not like all the other manufacturers can step up and fill that void.